All right, Crim 4. Here we go with Chapter 10, which is the chapter that's going to talk about juries. So let's get into it if I can get the PowerPoint to move to the next slide. Yay. Okay. So, as most of you, I hope, are probably aware, we all, as Americans, have the right to have a jury trial. And that is a protection that's given to us within the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution. And when I say that you all have a right to have a jury trial, it does not necessarily mean that you have to have a jury trial. There are instances where a person might choose to have what they call a bench trial instead of a jury trial, which means you'd have a judge act as the jury in your case. And a lot of times people think, like, why would you want to do that? What would be the purpose? Well, if you think about certain types of cases, like let's just say child molestation cases, your average juror, who's a person off the street just like you and me, probably has not had a lot of experience with the whole concept of child molestation, and in their minds, they automatically probably judge the person who is sitting before them and charged with molesting a child. So I think a lot of times in cases like that, people would choose to have a judge as opposed to a jury because, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you see it, judges unfortunately see that all the time. They see child molesters every day. So that shock factor isn't necessarily there. So, but you do have a right to be tried by a jury of your peers. And typically when we're talking about a jury of your peers, these are going to be people who live in the same area where you live, in the same community. If you commit a crime in Fresno County, it's very likely that you will be judged by a jury of your peers, of other people who live in Fresno County. Unless there's a change of venue, and we talked about that early on in the semester. A change in venue meaning you would change the location of the trial for whatever reason. I think we used the example of the case of the two Fresno County sheriffs, correctional officers who were shot in Fresno. I think it's almost 4 years ago now. The guy who was arrested for shooting them could have had a decent argument, I think, to ask for a change of venue, to be tried in a different area, because people in Fresno County were really familiar with that case. It was a big local news story, and a lot of people actually knew the victims in the case. So that might have been a situation where a change of venue could have been granted. It was not, but that could have been. So anyways, typically you're going to be judged by a group of people who live in your community. The only qualification set forth in the Sixth Amendment is that it be an impartial jury chosen from the judicial district in which the crime was committed. And you've all heard the phrase, a trial by one's peers. So think about the county of Fresno, and what percentage of the county of Fresno is white? What percentage of the county of Fresno is black? What percentage of the county of Fresno is Hispanic? What percentage of the county of Fresno is Asian? What percentage of the county is male? Same thing with female. You would expect your jury to look like a cross-section of your community. So you would have, let's say Fresno County has 50% men and 50% women. You would expect then that your jury would be broken up into about 50% men and about 50% women. Let's say, and I'm throwing these numbers out there, I don't know this, but let's say 50% of the county of Fresno is Hispanic. And you would expect that there would be about 50% of your juror that would be of Hispanic descent. So does that make sense? So when I say that I have a right to be tried by a jury of my peers, that does not mean that I have a right to be tried by a group of 40-something-year-old ex-probation officer white women. That's unreasonable. Would that be a jury of my peers? Yeah, but it's not necessarily a cross-section of my community. So we have to understand that a jury of our peers does not necessarily mean that they must all look exactly like us. It means that the jury must look like my community. Blah, blah. Let me just skip that. Qualifications. This is almost scary when you understand what the qualifications are to be on a jury. In order to be on a jury, you must be a citizen of the United States, at least 18 years of age, and live in that district, that residential judicial district for usually 1 year. So for Fresno, you'd have to be a citizen of the United States, 18 or older, and have lived in Fresno for at least 1 year. A person must also be of ordinary intelligence. So think about that word, ordinary intelligence. What does that mean? That's a really good question. What does it mean? If you can imagine what the average person is, it almost gets scary to me at this point when we consider that basically anyone could be a juror. And so it's pretty interesting, but they must be of ordinary intelligence. There are some exemptions, some peace officers, and these are typically law enforcement police officers, because as a probation officer, I had to serve on a jury. I was not exempt. I was the wrong kind of peace officer. So most people are eligible to serve on juries. There are times when judges will release people from jury duty, and you all probably had that experience before. If you've ever received a notice for jury duty as a student, a lot of times they will kind of give you a break. If you are self-employed, things like that. So there are ways where you could be exempt from jury duty, but there are a lot of people will ask me, well, if I just walk in there and tell them I'm racist, does that mean that I'm going to get off of that jury panel? And it's probably not a really good idea, because you can imagine a lot of people do this every day because they don't want to be jurors. And I think a lot of times judges will call people out at that point and say, you know what, you're going to be on this jury just because you tried so hard to get off. But if there is, a preconceived idea of guilt or innocence, if you think that they are biased, or for death penalty cases, these are really interesting because the jury has to actually be a death qualified jury. And this is what happened in the Corey Muhammad case here in Fresno. Because his case is potentially a death penalty case, not only did they have to find enough people from the community who were not already biased and maybe didn't know that much about the case, but they also had to be willing to say that at some point they would be in support of the death penalty if it were warranted. So that's another extra little challenge for those. Attorneys can ask people to leave the jury panel for pretty much any reason. Except they can't say, well, you're white, so you're not going to be on this jury, or you're black, so you're not going to be on this jury, or you're Catholic, so you're not going to be on this jury. They have to make up other reasons. But typically, kind of depends on what the case is and what they're looking for a jury panel. I'm skipping through that. Most jury panels are going to have alternate jurors as well. Typically, the jury panel consists of 12 jurors. Depending on the case, sometimes they might have 2, 3, 4 alternate jurors. The O.J. Simpson case had numerous alternate jurors because they could have been in the middle of a trial, and if a juror got hit by a bus or something, the whole trial is going to have to start over unless you have an alternate juror. So these are jurors that will sit through absolutely everything just in case one of the jurors that was chosen is unable to continue. Back to the O.J. Simpson case. As you can imagine, or maybe you can't, O.J. Simpson's case was one of the first cases, probably was the first case, where court TV actually came in and televised the entire trial, like from start to finish, the entire trial. All day, everything on the news, everything was about OJ. It was all about OJ. What happened in court today? What happened here? What happened there? What are these reports? And blah. So anyways, the media was just flooded with information about the OJ Simpson case. Well, in order to keep those jurors from hearing all that information, they were sequestered. And that means they were taken away from the community. They were kept separately from the community and not allowed to read the news, watch TV, have private conversations with their families, things like that. So what they did is they took the whole group and they had them stay at a hotel together, and they lived completely separate from the community during the entire time that trial was going on. Can you imagine how stressful that could be? So even if they wanted to have discussions with their families, phone calls, they had to be monitored to make sure that the families weren't sharing information about the case. So it's a big deal. It doesn't happen that often, but when you have a really important case like OJ's, or, you know, I'm trying to think about another case that might be like that. Maybe Harvey Weinstein. I don't think they actually did do that, but they could have. Cases where there was a lot of media attention, you don't want your jury to hear any of that, so you sequester them and make them go away. There's a lot of complaints about the jury system. I think I mentioned my experience. I was chosen for a jury. I was either a probation officer at the time, or I was in grad school to become, as a criminology student. My dad was a cop. I'd been in law enforcement, corrections, been around that world my entire life. And I was shocked, really, when the defense attorney did not excuse me from the jury, because I figured that he would believe that I was going to be biased. And so we sat through the whole trial. It was only a day or two. And after the trial was over, I was able to talk to the defense attorney, and I asked him, how come you chose me? Why did you keep me on this jury? And he said, this case was a loser. It didn't matter who I had on the jury. So that kind of rocked my whole concept of the whole jury system, because I was frustrated because it was clear that the attorney, I don't know if he didn't care. I don't think the attorney cared. So it kind of made me think twice about the jury system when I realized that the attorney he really didn't care about the case. And the guy was convicted in probably an hour. So anyways, if you ever get called for jury duty, please don't disregard that notice. You could end up in custody. So, yeah. There are a few cases that are reviewed in the book. Blah, blah, blah. Impartial jury, must be 18, U.S. citizen, and live in that district for a certain period of time. Attorneys can exclude potential jurors with challenges for cause and peremptory challenges. And I think that's it. So I'm going to stop the recording.